Welcome to Exclusive on Atameken Business. Today we delve into the hidden world of wealth protection and reputation management with leading experts from the prestigious Farrant Group, Simon and Alex Gilmore. In an era where crises can emerge in an instant, these experts navigate the intricate web of geopolitics, regulatory pressures, and public scrutiny to safeguard the interests of the world's most high-profile individuals. Today they'll reveal the secrets behind shaping powerful public narratives, mitigating unseen risks, and the lessons that could reshape Kazakhstan's elite landscape. So, gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining me on my program today.
Thank you for having us.
So the first question is, what strategies do you use to protect and preserve the wealth and reputations of high-profile individuals and families in today's complex global environment?
Well, that's a great question, because I think a lot of it depends on what is it that they're trying to achieve. It always has to be strategic. So we will always start with anyone is about what are they trying to achieve? What are they, and then trying to map out what are the risks as they see them, where are there any potential threats, but also on a positive side, what are the great opportunities? What are they trying to say about themselves? So I think to protect a reputation, you're much better off about having a profile as well, because somebody who has very little said about them, and often you find with some people, they're probably very successful people, they say, no, I'm private. I don't want to say too much about myself. It's actually our job to say to them, okay, if you don't say something about yourself, somebody else will make that story up for you. And that may not always be positive. It might be inaccurate, in fact. Sometimes it might deserve to be not positive, but usually they're actually just, these are people who want to tell a story about themselves and will have a great story and are often very personable. And that's how they've become successful, because they are very interesting people. They often have a range of interests. They often do a lot of good work. They do philanthropic work, for example, that deserves to be heard. And if they're not talking about that, then that can become an issue. So often we'll start off from a point of, okay, where is it you want to get to? And it might be they want to be protected from external threats. Okay, fine, we can talk through that. Or it might be, okay, I want to be seen as a great citizen of my country, somebody who does a lot of good work with disadvantaged people, for example, or someone who's seen as a very international individual. So we will often, from that strategic standpoint, we go, okay, this is where you are now, where do you want to get to? And then our job after that, our exciting job after that, is to work out the path of how they're going to get to that place. And what's important for them to learn is this, and we always explain this, is this is not something that can be done overnight. Building a reputation is a bit like building a business. It takes time, and you build that reputation through delivering a number of different things from whatever it is that person wants to be able to achieve. And then our job as communicators is to ensure that strategy is put into place, and so then it's properly understood about what it is that they have accomplished.
Some of our biggest high net worth individuals in Kazakhstan are pretty private. So what kind of profile would you suggest that they build?
Okay. Well, I would say it could go, they don't have to say everything about themselves. Nobody has to say everything about themselves. Political figures, sports figures, music figures, etc. will often have a certain part of their life which they share with others, and that's fine. So, and I think this is very much the same with a business figure and an ultra high net worth individual. Say, okay, there are certain parts of your life, and maybe large parts of your life you don't want to talk about. Why should you talk about your family, your children, your relationships, that kind of thing? That's your life, that's your world. But actually, there's often a lot in their business life which crosses over into their other worlds that that they might be very passionate about. So, for example, there might be someone who's very passionate about technology. Tell us about tech. Often they have really interesting thoughts about where things need to go. They can talk about, for example, fintech. They might be in that world and have some really interesting thoughts about it, because they're often involved in very innovative markets where a lot of people around the world don't know it. Give one example is cryptocurrency. We've worked with people who are involved in that crypto world. Crypto is a really misunderstood term because people can't really articulate what it is. Yeah. They've had a lot of bad stories about it. Some very bad things have happened around crypto, and that's become a big problem for them and for the industry as a whole. But actually, I would be arguing with them that it's making the case to them that they should be saying more about crypto and explaining some more about it to help sort of overcome some of those challenges that may exist.
Well, maybe I should then I'll go and ask Alex the next question. So how would you navigate the challenges posed by geopolitical issues, business dynamics, regulatory constraints and social concerns whilst keeping the interests of your clients at the forefront?
I think with in the space that we work in, balancing the kind of needs of clients and what their ambitions are reputationally with the external factors which may influence public perception is one of the ultimate challenges. And I think that what we remind ourselves of is that there is no cookie cutter, one size fits all approach to achieving any reputational goal. As previously mentioned, the intention of engaging a strategic communications agency with our sort of services can really vary from building a high profile to building a low profile. And so working out how we can effectively do that while navigating these challenges is really part of the fun, I would say.
Could either one of you share specific examples where these issues were intersected and how you managed them successfully?
I think there are a range of different things of how we have managed them successfully. I can, without giving any confidences away, because of course, it's another very important point about what we do is it has to be kept confidential because that is so important for them. And actually, there's a difference between being totally private and the importance of confidence. So they need to be able to trust us. They might have some difficult things that have happened in their lives that they want to be able to discuss, and we can talk them through. So I think to give some to give a couple of sort of specifics, if you like. So we've been working with a family who are kind of sort of from a sort of very privileged background in the UK. They have big connections to sort of some very high-profile people, shall we say, from the world of politics and royalty and that sort of thing. And they've had big regulatory challenges around some of their wealth, which was associated with a charitable foundation. So quite often it can be quite confusing, and there can be regulatory issues with what is regarded as in their own personal space and in more of a charitable foundation, if you like, in a trust format. So that clearly was very, very difficult. What they needed to do was be able to challenge some of the messaging which was in the media at that time about those individuals, because they were bringing their family into it, and it was a very difficult matter for them. But actually what the issue really was is the regulators were able to get their side of the story across because they issue press releases saying the following are under investigation, that sort of thing. Haven't done anything wrong, they haven't been convicted or even accused of anything, but they're just saying we are having an investigation into this following area. So what we could do on their behalf is say, okay, they need to be able to tell their side of the story within the sphere of what is appropriate and what they should be saying at that particular point. So the way we set about it is by setting out a series of media briefings, social media updates, press releases, and other things that could be used to materials that could be presented to the press. So the press had that fuller picture. What we can't do is make bad stuff go away. And that was what we'd always make clear. So the outcome is often not to say bad stuff needs to go away, but what you can say is we need to be able to manage it. I need to be able to manage it effectively and say, okay, what's the outcome? As I mentioned earlier about the importance of strategy, say, okay, what do you want? What's the outcome of this? And if they want to say, I want to be exonerated of anything I might be accused of, well, they've come to the wrong person. Right. They need to be talking to a lawyer for that kind of stuff. But they work in the court of law. We work in the court of public opinion. So we need to ensure that what their standpoint is, their side of the story is properly understood. So the public and readers and users of social media and so on will have a balanced view, and then it's up for them to make up their own minds about it. But we want to give them the best opportunity that they have to do that.
Well, actually, speaking of that, in a world where crises can unfold instantly due to global access to information, how do you effectively mitigate risks and prepare your clients for potential crises that might arise?
I think there are a few aspects of this. I mean, preparing for crisis is always difficult. It's always confusing because I think it's almost human instinct to assume a crisis may never actually strike you. This is always something that happens to someone else is quite often the opinion. And so I think there are really two I guess, elements of communications which could really support with kind of preparing for risk and mitigating risk. The first one is kind of completely having an open communications channel with your audience from the get-go, because what can often happen in times of kind of mistrust or crisis is that there is a narrative that is distinct and has broken from the truth. And what is needed is to reclaim that narrative. But if your audience and the wider public already know what, as a company, as an individual, as a charity, what your values are, what you stand for, what your perspectives are, you already then have a group of people who can come to your defense, maybe not publicly, but they already know where you stand. So if a piece of information comes out about you which is categorically false, but is still convincing, people's opinions are kind of already halfway fixed. I'd say the other thing is it's really kind of the role of people within a company or within a central internal team is to really understand what vulnerabilities or kind of reputational risks do currently exist. And it's quite a hard conversation to acknowledge, what we, in the eyes of everyone, are not going to be perfect, but really understanding what internal risks could be exploited or picked at by the media or by a foe or a business rival, whoever it may be, and creating scenario plans based off of that. It means that when a crisis does unfortunately hit, preparations have already been made, and the initial panic, which can often kind of stymie development and a clear process and a clear end goal, are remedied quicker.
It's a bit of a joke in our business, but someone, if someone rings up and says we have a crisis, the answer is you should have rung me 2 months ago, because often it's too late by the time you try exactly before the thing struck. So what my advice would always be is businesses and organizations and perhaps high net worth individuals need to have plans in place, and they need to plan scenarios, and they need protocols for what needs to happen should a particular matter take place. I mean, we, Alex and myself, have a background for a while working in government communication in the UK, and a lot of our work was around coordinating responses to big, national emergencies. So the COVID emergency was one of those, and there was a lot of talk around how the world was sort of underprepared for a pandemic of that kind. But a large amount of work does go on around specific events that, in the event of something happening, a natural disaster or a big challenge or a political catastrophe or something like that, then there are protocols for the way it responds. And that means it's important that everyone knows what their role is, and that there are, and my advice to CEOs would be, delegate your authority as well, because the CEO may not be able to be contacted. You've had times where they can't be contacted because they're away or they are flying or something like that, and an emergency situation suddenly develops. Everyone needs to know who is ultimately in charge, so a call can be made. But the way to do that is to do it before these things happen. So as part of any organization, private or public organization, they need those protocols in place so they know, should something happen, this is the response, or this is certainly who should lead the response, and at the very least, who is responsible for leading that response. Because you can never plan for every eventuality. There are certain things that can happen completely, that like COVID, that no one really foresaw. But at least what you have is a structure of, okay, this is the team who needs to take over at this point and make those calls very quickly.
But then how do you pitch yourself as a business to a high net worth individual who doesn't believe in investing into something that's, according to them, is somewhere in the distant, unforeseeable future, like a COVID situation or anything like this? Because there are some cases that, emergency situations, they pop up almost, unexpectedly.
Yes.
So how would you convince them to start investing earlier on before the crisis looms?
Yeah, I think they just need to have, it needs to be part of their planning in general terms. So we would often work, for example, with law firms who might, what these people tend to be is very good at planning their legal affairs. So, around their family matters, their will. So when I pass away, this is what's going to happen to my thing. So that is kind of the ultimate, emergency, if you like. And the people plan for that pretty well. They think a lot about it.
That's the standard, I guess.
Exactly. But what they're not so good at doing is, okay, another emergency might happen, like, I suddenly have a criminal investigation. Again, it might be completely wrong, probably will be, but these things happen. They need to be able to respond to it. So it's asking themselves those difficult questions, saying, okay, what kind of, if the regulators and the authorities are looking, sometimes they will just randomly look. There may be some adversaries from their business world or from their personal world who don't dislike them, who will be putting out misinformation about them. And that in turn can be very problematic. So again, it's getting them to think about that as part of their planning, like their legal planning, like their financial planning.
I think just to jump off of what you've said there. I think it's really important for CEOs, business leaders, high-profile individuals, whether they're public-facing or they're more private, is to really understand that reputation and public opinion it's a currency, it's an asset. It can appreciate, it can depreciate over time, and it needs looking after because it can have a very real-world consequence. It can impact business continuity. It can impact the confidence that the public have in you, that a regulator may have in you, that a board may have in you. And really looking out to protect your own reputation to ensure that business continuity isn't impacted is something that from a communication standpoint is really key.
But then how do you ensure that public perception of these individuals or families or organizations is aligned with the reality of these individuals, these clients that you represent, especially when scrutiny is constant and global?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point on scrutiny. Scrutiny is unrelenting these days, and the reason being is social media, primarily. It's kind of put everything into overdrive. It's whipped it up into a super level that we never really saw before.
On steroids.
Absolutely on steroids, and it means it's unrelenting. So it's kind of, I remember, when 24-hour news channels were the thing in the late 90s, they were coming through, and it was always like, wow, the news cycle never ends now. It used to be once a day or twice a day or whatever it was. And that became 20. Now it's like three-dimensional, 24/7. It's happening in all different areas. So it's on different channels, it's on different places, it's on private networks as well. So that means a crisis can blow up really, really quickly. And rather than appearing first in the media, often actually it appears sometime after. These things usually start on social media and eventually make their way into the news. Yeah. So again, as I said earlier, it's about what you are able to change is the important thing that needs to be focused on. So there are many elements that maybe they can't focus on and they cannot change. But what you can do, again, as part of your preparedness planning, is make sure you have protocols in place in order to handle it. And I know, Alex, you do a lot of work in sort of a framework around that actually helps support some of our clients to deal with that.
Absolutely. I think one of the things to note with the rise of social media and how it's just such a key part of the global communications and information landscape is, the means and the methods that people can use to spread fake news or harmful narratives are evolving far quicker than any organization, any government's mechanisms exist to identify and combat these kind of harmful scrutinies if they are unfair or fair. Otherwise, and I think a good framework that we certainly employ is knowing where to recognize where these harmful disinformation narratives can appear, knowing how to effectively evaluate the kind of risk that they pose, because in some cases a piece of disinformation may be so small and so trivial that it doesn't actually require a response.
Yeah, not everything does.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then kind of really the next stage is assessing what a communications response would be. And that's really about proportionality, because as we mentioned, some responses, some disinformation, some fake news may require a direct, rebuttal because that is proportionate, whereas some things are so trivial. We talk about, social media is everywhere. If you have an individual without a following who is saying one thing, that requires a very different response than if a regulator is saying something. And then from that, if the assessment is we need to have a robust dynamic response, creating a response which is going to really speak to the audience who have been duped in some cases, or the audience who are being targeted with harmful disinformation or a harmful narrative, and then targeting the platforms that they regularly use to receive their information is really key.
Well, let me ask you this. What public image or narrative should Kazakhstan's most prominent business figures aim to project, and how would you guide them in shaping their public agenda?
I think it's a really interesting question, because I think I think Kazakhstan is very well known in certain geographies, in other parts of the world less so. So I think before any individual or any organization, in fact, can really talk more about itself, they are a projection of the country as a whole, and I think that's a huge responsibility that they have. So I think what they have is a duty to go and talk about their country and what Kazakhstan stands for at the same time that they're talking about themselves, their own business objectives, for example, because I think that understanding needs to happen, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this region generally, about Central Asia generally, Kazakhstan generally. the geopolitical situation at present has made that more challenging, but it's not insurmountable. And because I think anyone who has been to Kazakhstan will see for themselves what it's like. So I think it's a case of helping that understanding to take place. So I know there are lots of fantastic events that take place in Kazakhstan where people can see the incredible modernity of Astana and the incredible young, dynamic, motivated, well-educated workforce that we see as part, and which I think people will see is more akin to what they would expect from somewhere like Singapore or South Korea or someone like that. Is what people will find for themselves. So I think, and in doing so, I think that will help their own personal projection. So once you talk about Kazakhstan, they can then pivot to talking about their own world in which they work. What sector do they work in? What are their personal priorities? What do they want to achieve? What's their backstory as well? Where are they from? What they want to do? What's their vision for perhaps expanding to new markets overseas?
But I feel like there's a bit of a vacuum in this area, because I'm not sure if any of our prominent, high-profile individuals talk about Kazakhstan on their level or project any positive, image of Kazakhstan abroad. Do you think that's? I guess since you're mentioning it, that means that niche or that there's a vacuum for this.
I think there's a vacuum, and I think there's a great opportunity. I think some do it very well. I think there are some, who will work in that space, but others, it doesn't occur to them, because why would they? Most people do not feel they have to be
like their job.
Informal ambassadors for their country. There's no obligation to do this, of course, but I just feel there is a barrier there, a barrier to understanding. When you have a barrier, you need to look at the best way to overcome it. So my advice would be to actually look at the bigger picture. So maybe start from the beginning and work out. So, yourself, your personal ambition, the ambition of your company, the ambition of your sector, and then ultimately it builds up to the ambition of your country and your region, perhaps.
Are any of our high-profile families or individuals doing that at the moment?
I'd be really interested to see, actually. To be honest, I don't have any data to back up whether they do or they don't. I think so often the story of a country is told through politicians and ambassadors, because that's their job. That's fine. But I think also it needs to be, a bigger focus needs to be put on those who are business figures and have benefited well from their country, do have some sort of moral obligation to talk more about their country. You've had it from other countries as well. They put other places on the map. You've had, to give a case from the UK and the US, Richard Branson took a very sort of unique British perspective, quirky but different and unique. But he was very much sort of wore that kind of union flag kind of thing. Like, I'm taking a certain British element to the US where they want to know about it. Equally, you'll look at the kind of tech firms. They take California to the world. Not the US so much, but California and Silicon Valley. And they make that a very desirable mindset. And it's all like, so I think it's taking that, it's interesting how people can take geography. They can take sunny California. They can take rainy England. People should take beautiful Kazakhstan to the world.
I think Kazakhstan has a really unique opportunity. Anthony and I are lucky enough to have worked in the country and with entities and corporations in the country for many years. And what's really clear is that Kazakh culture, this kind of ancient nomadic culture, mixed with the very modern kind of forward-thinking outlook in terms of there's a young, educated workforce, there's a heavy investment in tech and new technologies. And I think the mixture of the two and kind of conveying what we would kind of call the cultural diplomacy of communicating, the uniqueness of Kazakh art, Kazakh fashion to the world, they're really kind of accessible entry points which appeal to many people beyond what high-profile figures or politicians may be able to appeal to.
Yeah, and quite often this will not happen through official channels, if you like. Yes, embassies will be doing their thing and trade delegations and so on, and that's fine. But actually a lot of this stuff comes from social media again. So people are looking at, wow, amazing landscapes, wow, amazing culture, and all sorts of aspects of Kazakh culture can be seen online, and I think that's what needs to be pushed more than anything else.
Your CEO, Michael Farrant, has said that your company thrives on solving complicated challenges. Can you share examples of recent scenarios with geopolitical implications or bent where you have made a significant impact?
Sure. One thing I can talk is we do quite a lot of work working alongside the legal profession. Sometimes it involves individuals, but actually we work with lawyers quite a lot when it involves big international litigations and big cases which have huge geopolitical connotations. We were privileged to work alongside the Federal Republic of Nigeria, for the federal government. They were fighting to overturn a $11 billion arbitration award which had gone against them, and they were fighting to overturn it by demonstrating to the court that the original deal, it was based around an extractives deal in Nigeria, had been obtained fraudulently. Right. And they were able to successfully demonstrate that in court. And as a result, about 1 year ago, that decision was overturned. So Nigeria was no longer on the hook for $11 billion. Now, where do we come into it? Well, it was very important for us to help explain to the world about the importance of that decision and what that actually means. So what that really means is that no longer can countries, developing countries from the global south, be pushed around by private companies who are doing deals which then go wrong for any reason, and then they go through the arbitral process and get big awards against them. So they're sort of taking money out of the country. So and often these are, as in this case, can be brought about through bribery and corruption. So they were able to demonstrate to the court that had happened. So our job was really to tell that the drama happened in the courtroom. Our job was to take that to the world and explain to the people of Nigeria, the people of Africa, and more broadly about why that should not be allowed to exist. So I think that is a case in point of how it's a very, very complex situation, but we were proud to have worked with the legal team to successfully overturn it.
I can give an example. So we were proud to and very privileged to work with a global technology firm who also manufacture hardware for a specific part of the industry. And globally, their market share was very high, but they weren't the kind of market leader. They were very much number 2, number 3 in that field. And over a number of years, it had emerged in the news some allegations against the kind of number 1 global leader in that industry, which prompted regulators in quite a few markets to want to impose a blanket ban on companies in that area. And so at that point, working with this company who were at risk of having business continuity disrupted and interrupted due to allegations against, frankly, a competitor for reasons and for justifications that they have no involvement in, really navigating through a complex, political, policy-based, regulatory, and kind of very much business continuity perspective is a real privilege and a real honor, and it's something that is not applicable to every client. But when our CEO talks about navigating the complex space and complex areas and issues for clients, I think we've been very privileged and very proud to work with many industries, many markets, many individuals, many companies, and navigating these with success.
Yeah, and by their nature, they are very unique. It's very, that's why they're complex. There are things that there are PR issues that appear all the time, but because they can be managed in a certain way, they often won't require our expertise, and actually, we'll be honest with clients as well and saying, actually, that's something that they could be doing themselves, or do they really need, extra support to do that, because they might be able to do it in-house. But when we're able to give that extra strategic advice, that's important. All we do is advise, we cannot make things happen just through a magic kind of scenario. We actually work with them to help them manage themselves. And so often it's about increasing their capacity, so enabling organizations to do it, whether that's in sitting down with them and ensuring their strategy is in place, whether it's working them on the right tactics, on scenario planning, all those things. It's about really kicking the tires and ensure they are well placed to do it.
Has your group provided litigation support to Kazakhstani entities?
No, we have not, and it's it's definitely something that we are open to. That should our services be required, we'd be very happy to. And I think the advantage I would argue we have is we understand Kazakhstan. There are many others that maybe have not visited, don't understand it. We've been coming to Kazakhstan for many times over the years, and it just helps. We understand what makes things tick here. We understand the structure of the country, the setup of government, as well as the dynamic economy that exists.
And so, if not, then, and you'd be more than happy to, what considerations would factor into that decision making?
We always look very carefully at any case that we would work on. We are not like the world of communications, public relations is very different to a law practice. A legal practice, it works on the basis that anyone is entitled to legal representation. Yeah, and that's sort of whether the person is innocent or guilty, whatever bad stuff they may have done, however nasty that might have been, they are still entitled to that, and that's the right thing in law. When it comes to communications, they don't have the same rights. So ethics are very, very important to us. So we will always look very carefully at any issue around it and ask ourselves whether ethically that's something we would be willing to be involved with, because we hold ourselves to the very high standards. We as reputation managers need to look at our own reputation as well. If we get a reputation for not working with the right people, kind of undesirable types, or trying to support people who've done really bad things in their lives, that's something we need to ask ourselves very difficult questions about. So we have a very robust process that we go through before taking on any new client about that. Now, 9 times out of 10, it's never a problem, but there's always that occasion where you just need to look very carefully about it, whether it's something we would want to do.
Have you ever worked with Kazakhstan's most prominent families or high net worth individuals? If so, how many? Are there many?
We never give away our exact clients, but we've worked.
There's been a few.
We've had the privilege of speaking to some well-known or influential people, shall we say, and businesses, because often it is linked with a sort of business context. We pride ourselves on giving the most discreet advice, and actually a lot of our clients don't know who our other clients do, because they all deserve that degree of confidence, of confidentiality, and I think that's very important that we give that. So we always work in ultimate discretion, and even if we're saying, look, sorry, we can't work on this for any particular reason because ethically we don't agree with it, or because sometimes we're conflicted, like we might be working with someone on who is conflicted with them through a legal challenge or something like that, then we're always very clear to say so. But we never talk, we never tell.
Have you ever experienced any challenges with pushing their public agenda?
There are challenges on many different levels. Challenges can be, they're very rarely legalistic, in fact. It's not normally that we get on the wrong side of the law. In fact, we never get near that sort of territory. But there can be challenges that somebody has a very difficult matter that needs to be resolved. And actually, I think sometimes fundamentally that actually when someone has a very limited, minor challenge, if you like, that can sometimes be harder than a very obvious one, because an obvious one actually is interesting, and the press like to write about what's interesting. So whether it's something, so often the more controversial issues are actually the ones where they want to hear more, so you have the opportunity to be able to tell your story. Where it can be a challenge, when actually someone just says, okay, this is when they haven't got a challenge at all, they just say, I want to sell my product, I want to challenge, about why aren't people not buying my product? Well, how can you, that's a very hard thing to achieve just by saying, okay, we can promote it. We're not marketers. We're not into that marketing world. That's what they need to be looking at marketing and advertising and all that sort of thing. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding, I think, what we do, that we're in that kind of marketing and advertising world, and we're really not. We're on a much more strategic level than they would appear to be. Sometimes advertising and marketing is part of the solution, if you like, and that's fine. But when it comes to strategic solutions to things, that would just be one part of the mix.
That's right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.